Hi, welcome. I'm Christopher. This is Challenger Tabletop, and we're back for another painting stream, continuing with the Genestealer Cults theme, painting a new Genestealer Cults character today. And welcome back. Going to be talking about playing narrative 40k. So it's something I've been enjoying for coming up on probably 10 years now. I've had a long-running campaign with a bunch of my friends, and that's pretty much what I'm going to be talking about. How I set it up, how you can get the most out of running a narrative campaign. Welcome! I got some viewers finally. Say hi. And look forward to chatting while I get some painting done. I did mess around with my setup a bit. I realized I was almost getting out of frame. Hey, welcome Mortimer. Welcome, good to have you in the channel. So I lowered the camera a bit because I realized I'm mostly looking down when I'm painting, and I was almost getting off camera, and this should be a little bit better. And this is my first time I've had someone in the chat right away. Yesterday I did have Pyro in chat, and I didn't see him for way too long, so sorry about that. Well, let's take a look at the mini we're going to be painting today. Here we are. So this is another old out-of-print miniature. It is a Adeptus Arbites judge, and I don't know if it's from the Rogue Trader days, I assume, or if it's sort of like the early days of Warhammer, but I'm very excited to paint it. It was a miniature I never knew existed until I saw one for sale on eBay, out of my price range, and I had to keep looking around till I found one I could afford. And again, we're going to be naming this miniature after a well-known Warhammer YouTuber, probably the most well-known, Winters SEO. So I'm going to be naming this miniature Winters in honor of him. It's a lot of fun for me to have some miniatures on the table named after my favorite players. So I thought he's very cool. I've got him equipped with a like a power maul and a las pistol, and I'm going to be using him in my Genestealer Cults army as a neophyte hybrid squad leader. So it should be fun. Shouldn't take too long to paint this guy. What you see here is how he was painted as I did pick him up secondhand, and I have actually got him primed now. So let's go ahead and switch to the painting cam. Oh, I was moving it around. All right, that's a little bit better. And let's zoom in and I'll show you what he's looking like. I got him primed black, so that's gonna speed things up. Oh, let's switch cameras. Here we go. So here you can see he's primed black, ready to paint. I didn't do a perfect prime job on him because he is already painted. I wasn't worried about hitting every inch of him with primer, but it will hopefully speed things up for us. And actually I might start off just by filling in with black paint some of these areas that weren't fully primed black. So that's what we're going to be doing, and I'll get into the subject real quick here, which is narrative campaigns in 40k, and specifically playing a narrative campaign with matched play games. I know there is now Crusade Rules, and that's something I'll touch on briefly, but not exactly what I'm talking about. So I got my clean water. Going to be starting with some Abaddon Black, and just some quick fill-in on this guy while I introduce the topic. So, narrative Warhammer 40k. Zoom out just a little because it's hard for me to keep him totally centered. So why focus on the narrative? Of course, Warhammer has a lot of backstory and lore and fluff to it, which is, I know, a big part of what people enjoy about 40k. And narrative for me is a way to kind of incorporate that into playing the game. And some of the benefits of it are it makes the game more immersive when you're thinking about the world or the planet that the battle is taking place on. And I think it can make it more cinematic, and it can make it more fun. And one of the things I like most about narrative play is it can introduce some stakes to the game, which I think can make it a lot more exciting. And by stakes, I just mean that you and your opponent both think about the campaign setting and kind of agree beforehand on what the results of the game, depending on who wins, will how it will affect the setting. So some examples might be like whoever wins the game conquers the planet that the game is set on. Or maybe you're fighting to protect civilians, and if the player who's protecting the civilians loses, then narratively you assume they're captured or killed, or maybe they get put into an even more dangerous situation that helps set up your next game. So that's kind of what I mean by stakes. My paint's a little too watered down, so it's not really covering super well. Trying to get the paint a little bit thicker on here. So generally, I do prefer to play these kind of narrative games as matched play games. And the benefit, I think, of playing matched play is just that it's the most fair game you can play of 40k, and it's the most traditional. It's what most people are used to. And I guess that's why I like to play matched play. But I don't think matched play makes it any more difficult to have a narrative. And I think it does, in fact, lend itself to it. So, about Crusade. Of course, Crusade Rules are what Games Workshop introduced in 9th edition to encourage players to play narrative. And they did this by creating a ton of extra rules. And that's mostly my problem with Crusade, is 40k already has, honestly, enough rules. It's especially in 9th edition with secondary missions, warlord traits, relics. It's a lot to keep track of, stratagems, and I'm not looking to layer more rules on top of this. So right away I had a negative opinion of Crusade because I like matched play. I didn't feel like matched play was missing anything. I never had a hard time incorporating narrative into my match play games, so I really just felt like I didn't need Crusade. And I know other players have voiced similar opinions, including Winters, who had a similar kind of opinion of Crusade when it first came out. I don't know if he's played more of it. I haven't seen any on his channel that I'm aware of. And I do feel like there's a flaw with Crusade, which is that the results of the game have a rules effect. So one player loses a bunch of units in the game or loses the game, there's an effect. I think, like, for instance, units can suffer like injuries or other negative effects if they're lost in the game. And this creates a problem, and conversely, units that survive the game can get a boost or a buff in the next game. And I think this creates the classic problem that a lot of people run into when they try to add rules to their narrative campaigns, which is that the players who are winning accrue advantages, while the players who are losing accumulate, penalties and debuffs. So the problem that's pretty obvious there is that if you're giving advantages to the player who's already winning, they're just going to win more. And it's usually called the win more problem. So that's the main reason I don't want to have in-game rules associated with a narrative campaign, is to avoid the win more issue. And if a player's losing games of 40k, they're going to be less motivated to go on playing. And that's something that you really want to avoid at all costs, is discouraging people to continue the campaign. I think a narrative campaign should make people want to play, and if it's discouraging them, it's basically doing the opposite of what you want. So that's my argument against Crusade. But I do think there's some instances where it's okay to have a game effect after a win or a loss, but you should agree on it beforehand, and it should always help the loser to, especially if you're playing like a 3-game set or something, I think it's okay to come up with a rule that's going to help the person who's behind in game 2, for instance, something like that, which I'll get into a little more in a bit. Anyway, I got some black paint on this guy, just thinking about where do I want to go next. I'm probably just going to do his mace as metallic, or maybe a metallic head with a black handle. Since I didn't hit that with any black paint, I think that would be a good place to go next. Probably his last pistol, I can do some silver there at the same time. And I'm thinking about his armor. How do I want to do that? I think what I want to do on the armor is have it be kind of a blackened silver. I'll do that silver and then cover it with kind of a watered down black. That's what I'm thinking. So maybe I'll do that if it's dry enough after that. So switching to some Iron Hand Steel here, base paint. Just going to give it a quick shake up here as I knock my camera. So next I thought I would get into starting a campaign and what's the best place to begin. And I think that the first thing you would want to do is figure out the setting for your campaign. It's kind of the easiest place to start. You can do it all on your own. You don't need anyone helping you out really at the very beginning. And your setting, really, there's a lot of options. It could be as narrow as, like Underhive or a hive, or it could be a planet, a moon, or a whole star system with multiple planets, or you could go as big as a sector of space with multiple star systems in it. And it just depends on how involved you want to get and kind of like how much you want to plan in advance. You could always grow the campaign as you go. If you start in one star system and it starts to feel a little bit constrictive, you could add another one or expand to a whole sector. And so the route I went for my campaign setting that I've been running is a star system. And of course you want to come up with a name for it. I named mine the Icarus system. In 40k you do have a lot of Icarus weapons, like the Icarus las cannon. Usually the name is used for weapons that have some advantage targeting air, as it comes from mythology, Icarus being the assistant of Daedalus, the inventor who made wax wings to escape an island, and Icarus, using the wax wings, flew too high, too close to the sun, and the wings melted, and he fell into the ocean, so only Daedalus reached safety. So the Icarus system has, I think, about 5 or 6 planets and 2 moons that the action takes place on. And over time, the focus just kind of naturally seemed to settle on one particular moon in the system called Transcendence, which is kind of like the upper class moon, I guess, that was like a garden moon or a paradise moon, where all the sort of nobles in the system preferred to live. And it got more or less destroyed in the course of the narrative campaign. and turned into like a savage moon with jungles and carnivorous plants and stuff like that. So figure out what you want your setting to be. And I did make a random generator. It's not like a computer program, it's just like instructions for generating a totally random star system. You do have to come up with the names, but it generates stuff for you like the number and types of planets and their moons and what their features are, stuff like that. I'm gonna paint this las pistol black with silver details. Guess I'll go silver on the handle. So the reason for sort of creating a setting and sticking to it is it creates some familiarity from game to game. Players will kind of get used to where it is that they're fighting and start to kind of care about it. And I think that makes the game a bit more immersive. Instead of just fighting on a battlefield that's however many inches by however many inches, you think about the planet or the moon, and it actually has some kind of character to it. And one of the fun things that this can do is inform your decisions about terrain. So for instance, after the destruction of Transcendence and it starts becoming overgrown with different types of alien plants, generally we would set up more forest type battlefields, and where we were using ruins and ruined buildings, we'd maybe have plants around the edges of them, like it's all becoming overgrown as time goes by. He's got some little buttons on his gun that could be lights or something. I'll show you that. Not exactly sure how I want to paint those. Maybe I'll just do them silver for now. I can always come back and hit them with a little highlight color later. It's starting to look pretty good on the gun. So I see those as kind of the advantages of running campaign setting. And once you have your setting kind of decided, one of the fun things to do that can kind of help your players enjoy it is to make a map. So I have an art background. I made one in Photoshop, and later I came back and made kind of a 3D version of it using Blender, which is a free 3D program. I think I'm going to go ahead and start hitting the armor now. I'm going to do it silver, and then I'll come back and go over that with a watered down black is the plan. So Photoshop, Blender, you could even just draw with a pen and paper. And mostly the reason you're going to want the map is just as something to show your opponent as kind of a prop. Usually I present it to my opponent in the way of like, hey, why don't you look at this map and choose a place that you want to have our battle. And then I'll set up the table kind of to reflect your choice. Oops, I think that's his jacket, not an armor plate. I see there's a little armor poking out from under his jacket. There we go. So that's kind of how I use it. Map is really helpful. And it can be fun to make also if you have some artistic skills or want to start to develop them. A little tight. All right, there we go. So making a map can help you help inspire your terrain setup, but it can also kind of inspire you to make terrain too. I definitely, oh, I see he's got an armor plate coming out of his jacket, or on top of his jacket over here. Shoulder pad. So usually I have the guest player pick the setting of the battle, and then from there we'll talk about what the reason for the battle might be. And all of this is just to make the game kind of more immersive and cinematic for the players, so it's not really important what you decide, but just whatever sounds fun to the both of you. Usually I'll say, oh, hey, okay, what if this? And get the other player's reaction, and if they say, sometimes they'll have an idea based on what you suggested, and they'll suggest something to you that gives you an idea, so you just kind of go back and forth, sort of spitballing an idea, brainstorming an idea for the battle until something that seems to fit appeals to both of you. And generally both players agreeing on what they want to happen is kind of the core of narrative to me. It's kind of a collaborative activity. I don't really try to tell my opponent, here's what we're doing, here's the narrative. Because then they might feel like, it's less fun because they're not involved in the decision making. By the way, are you guys doing hobby tonight? I'm curious if other people are painting, and if so, what? So usually for a narrative battle, there will be some kind of inciting event. What is like the thing that happened in the campaign world that led to this battle? So some examples of that might be like the invasion of a planet, or maybe a distress call, maybe archaeologists. Ooh, you're finishing up an eliminator squad, Mortimer. That's awesome. I went for las fusils on my eliminators. Which weapon are you using? Another example of what could be an inciting event, maybe archaeologists have been doing a dig on a planet and they've uncovered something like an artifact or ancient weapon, and two armies are racing to come get control of it. Or maybe they broke into a Necron tomb and the Necrons have come to life and started to attack the planet, something like that. Some other examples of inciting events that we've used over the years in our campaigns are like a zombie plague spread over a planet, as Nurgle Chaos characters had come to attack it. So the Imperium forces sort of responded to a virus outbreak. Oh yes, good choice. I think I know who this is. Awesome. So Mortimer's painting up some bolt rifles, sniper rifles for his Imperial Fists eliminators. Awesome. Thanks for being in the stream today. Really appreciate it, buddy. Mortimer is my usual 40k opponent, so he's going to recognize a lot of what I'm talking about here in terms of narrative campaign. We've been playing 40k together now for probably coming up on about 5 years. Probably all in the same campaign setting. Mortimer was playing Black Legion and Abaddon in a lot of the games, so it just made sense to narratively have Abaddon's 13th Black Crusade come to the system. And so other ones we've used, a warp anomaly, like a warp rift opening on a planet, chaos cultists trying to complete a ritual, and Imperial forces trying to stop it, an attack on an Imperial shrine to the Emperor, always something that's going to get a response from the Imperium. The landing of a Tyranid scout ship. Looks like I've got a little hair on this guy that I want to try and remove if I can. There we go. So you've got an inciting event that can basically inspire the narrative for a particular battle. But one thing that's been a lot of fun for us has been playing a whole series in the campaign setting, like a best of 3 or a best of 5, or just playing 5 games in a row. And that also kind of increases the stakes, because now every time you win or lose a game, you're either getting ahead or falling behind in the series of games. And some things that you can do to make playing a series more fun and interesting. One thing that I've really enjoyed is playing like an escalation. So your first game is going to be 500 points. Your next game is going to be 1,000 points, twice as big. Then you go up to like 1,500 or 2,000. And you can have it building up to like a climax, kind of a finale game of, you know, if you've got the models, 3,000 points, or play Apocalypse. So playing a series can be a fun way to really enjoy your campaign setting. And it can also be a good way to incorporate stakes into the setting. So, for instance, playing a series of games to decide the fate of a planet, or the results of an invasion of the system, something like that. And when you are playing a series, that is one of the times where I think it makes the most sense to consider giving an advantage to the player who's falling behind. So, for instance, say you've been playing a 5-game series and you've played 4 games, and one person, or say you've played 3 and one person has won all 3 games. So at that point, the other person knows they can't win the series anymore. Even if they win both of the next games, they're still going to lose the series 2-3. And that can be a bit discouraging. And I think it makes sense in situations where one person might be getting a bit discouraged to give them some kind of advantage. So you might make an arrangement like, if the person who's already behind loses the 4th game, so they'll be behind 4-0, then they will have some advantage in the final game. Like, for instance, they get to be the defender and pick which side of the table they set up on. That does work best if the other player sets up the terrain, so that you're not both setting up and picking your side. Could be a bit much for an advantage. I do try to shy away from actually giving someone an in-game advantage, like extra points or extra units or anything like that, just because I believe in keeping the game as fair as you can make it. I think if you have an in-game advantage, it makes it less fun to win, because you didn't do it all on your own. And if you do have an in-game disadvantage, that makes it less fun to play in general, because you feel like it's not really fair. But playing a series of games can be really fun in a campaign setting, is something I definitely do enjoy. I'm going to switch to brown now and paint this guy's belt and bags, and I'm thinking his coat too. Brown is his coat. Maybe I'll do his coat gray with a brown wash. I think I like that idea a little better. And it would differentiate it from his bags and his belt, which otherwise that might be kind of a lot of brown. So determining stakes for the game is optional. You can just say, here's what the setting is, here's where we're playing, here's the inciting event that led to the battle, and that's enough. But I think having some stakes for the game, stakes in the narrative, I'm not talking about like betting on the game or anything, is really a great way to enhance the effect of playing with a narrative. So saying like, well, let's see. I think I have some examples of stakes we've used. I guess probably just the two I've already mentioned: control of a planet, or the fate of civilians. Those are a couple classic ones that are always fun. So I remember Mortimer and I actually were playing a series of games. I think it was a best of 5 for the fate of Transcendence Moon, which had become kind of the focal point of our campaigns. And Mortimer was ahead. I think he won the series 4-1, if I remember correctly. And in the final game, since the Chaos Forces were winning the series, we decided it would make sense if the wealthy, noble human population was starting to evacuate the moon. And a lot of times, as the story kind of develops from game to game, it will give you ideas for where it can go next. And this was the case for us. And our decision was informed by the result of our games. Chaos was winning, so that made us think, well, what would happen if Chaos was winning? Probably the people would be getting out of there. So you could say that for that final game, our inciting event was that Chaos was taking over the planet. They were definitely going to win control of the planet in the 5-game series. So the game we decided would be set at the airport where civilians were trying to board like escape craft to get off the moon. And the stakes, we decided, if the Imperium, my Dark Angels, won, the civilians would escape on board their evacuation craft, whereas if Chaos won, the civilians would be captured. And we set up the table so that one end was where the transport craft were being loaded up, and if Chaos could get there and take those objectives on that side of the table, then they would capture the civilians, and that's what happened. So the sort of narrative result was that the planet was more or less depopulated. We figured 80-90% of the population was trying to get on these giant escape craft, and so that many were now, the majority of the population of the planet was now gone. And who would be left? We figured probably the ones who weren't important enough or couldn't afford a ticket on the escape craft, sort of the servitors and the lower level imperial citizens who lived in the underhives and stuff like that. And with the sort of command and control gone from the planet, all the nobles and leaders and politicians being abducted, these people would be kind of left to fend for themselves with no real organization anymore. And we decided they would probably move out of the hives, which were probably being overrun with chaos troops and cultists and gene stealer cults, and they would end up living out in the woods and the wilderness. And over the next 100 years, we decided they became like cavemen living in tree forts and stuff like that, which affected how we would set up tables in the future. We had several battles after that. I played a bunch against a Tau opponent where he was trying to sort of like convert and take over these caveman tribes in the wilderness, and that was a result of the direction that the narrative went. So adding stakes that affect the narrative is really fun, and it's kind of like the most exciting part of having a narrative campaign. And especially then you get to look back after a while and go, hey, that planet's a ruin because I destroyed it, or that planet's not destroyed because I protected it. So playing a series, determining stakes. Optional rules. Sometimes as you are playing a campaign, I'm going to switch to gray now for his cloak here. Oh, I missed a bag. Optional rules sometimes will occur to you. I think they're fun to think up, that you want to try out in a certain game. And usually these are rules that you and your opponent talk about and decide before the game that do not give an advantage to one player or another, but just make things a little more interesting. And some examples I can think of are like, we had a game where there were wild animals that had been kept in captivity, like in zoos. We used like dragons, actually, that because the planet was under attack, their cages had been broken open and now they were running loose in the wild and potentially appearing on the battlefield. So we came up with some rules for how likely they were to appear each turn, where they would appear if they did, and then how they would behave once they appeared. So I think we had maybe 4 different sizes of dragons of different strengths and danger levels, with different stat lines that we figured out before the game. And they were basically equally likely to mess with either player, so it didn't really give anyone an advantage. But it made for a really memorable game. I remember one of Mortimer's obliterators ending up in a fist fight with a dragon that stretched on for like 2 or 3 turns, tying up that unit. So it really did affect the game, but it was sort of random who it affected. And I think those kind of rules are fun. One that was around in 8th edition that we have gotten a lot of use out of is the Death World Forests. Those were basically 3 different types of forest terrain that could attack your units. The most dangerous was Grappleweed, which would actually chase your units around and deal, I think, like mortal wounds to them. And there's also Shard Rack Spine and what was the other one? Barbed Venom Gorse, which is pretty much just a more dangerous version of the same rules as Shard Rack Spine. Well, he's coming along. We're going to go gray on the coat, and then I'll come back and hit it with a brown wash. So it's going to come out like kind of a dirty gray brown. Should look somewhat different than the bags. I'm going to be mixing that. I don't have a gray that's ready to use. Just going to use some White Scar and some Abaddon Black. What other optional rules? Can you think of any others that we've used, Mortimer? I can't at the moment. Another thing that's fun to come up with that doesn't have to give either player an advantage is custom missions. If you play a lot of 40k, you pretty much get tired of the regular missions, which is why they have been coming out with the mission packs now every year. But also you kind of get a feel for how the missions are designed, and it's not too hard to come up with your own. I think I got a little something in the paint trying to get that out. So custom missions, again, you don't really want them to, you want them to be balanced, but usually that's not a problem. The missions aren't too hard to figure out now, although I don't think we've done this in the current 9th edition. That would be fun to come up with another custom mission. We also haven't played a series of games in a while. I guess it's been hard to get together regularly for during the pandemic. But I do remember a couple of the custom missions we came up with. I'm sure you can remember some of them too. The one that jumps out to me right away that was really memorable was Find the Bomb. We played one where the inciting event for the battle was that the Chaos forces were attacking the planet and bombing the hives, and they had dropped a hive killer bomb on a hive, but it didn't go off. So the scenario that we came up with was that the Chaos forces were trying to search the craters where they had dropped bombs and find the hive killer bomb in one of the craters and set it off, blowing up the hive. And we kind of figured even everyone in the battle would be killed when it went off at the end of the game. And I think maybe we had even figured if you find it right away, you can just sit on it for 3 turns and then it will go off and end the game with a Chaos win. Whereas the Imperium were trying to find the bomb and defuse it. And that was the one. The Helldrake ended up finding the bomb. And it was, of course, the very last crater that we searched. Like everything, it's always in the last place you look. I think we figured every time you'd move a unit into a crater, which is where the objectives were, you'd roll a d6, and on a 6 you'd find the bomb in that crater. So the rules were intentionally would make it hard to find the crater and somewhat likely that it would be the last one that you would search. So I remember the Helldrake ended up holding that objective, and at the end of the game the bomb went off, the hive was destroyed, bad guys won, but it was just such a cinematic moment, kind of like picturing this Helldrake perched in a crater on top of a bomb. Probably it's tendrils or tentacles or something going into the bomb and activating it to set it off. And just the sort of image of the whole battlefield turning into a bright flash explosion and everything destroyed at the end of the game was just really fun and memorable. And a lot of times what makes you remember a game much later was the narrative. I do think that narrative makes games of 40k more memorable. And that's another reason to you have a narrative or a campaign setting. And at least a reason to talk about some kind of narrative background for the game before you play. Which is something that Winters has always been really good at. I remember one of the things I liked right away about Winters' SEO channel was that he always took time to talk about the narrative before the battle. And not everybody is equally into that. I would say at the other end of the spectrum, you have someone like Stephen Box, who's more focused on the sport of the game and the rules and the fact that it's a game and someone wins and loses. And clearly enjoys that element of it. That's what's fun for him, is feeling like he's playing a high-level chess match, as it were. Whereas I feel like someone like Winters gets a lot of his enjoyment out of thinking about the narrative and wouldn't want to miss out on that element of the game. The storytelling element, if you will. And of course, some of that can also affect actually your hobby side too, as sometimes you want to customize a miniature who did really well in the last game, or give him a name, or start collecting a new army so that it can feature in the campaign setting. That actually kind of happened with me. We had played those games to decide the fate of Transcendence Moon, and its population got abducted, And so we were left with the idea of kind of these empty hives where society was kind of collapsing. And that was about the time that I started collecting Genestealer cults. And part of the reason that I wanted to play that army was I imagined the Genestealer cults taking over these hives, sort of abandoned, ruined hives on Transcendence. And that motivated me to kind of tell that part of the story by playing games with this new faction. And say you're playing a lot of games on kind of like a jungle planet, it might mean that you start, decide to paint your models with green camouflage. Whereas if you were playing on a desert planet or a Mars type planet, you would have gone for brown or red. So it is fun when the hobby is influenced by the narrative. This guy is going to be one of the Genestealer cultists from Transcendence, who I'm painting right now. And we did have a kind of a break in the campaign. I don't know if it was because we weren't playing for a while or what. Oh, maybe it was because a new edition came out. It was around the time that they introduced the Cicatrix Maledictum, which is like the rift across the galaxy in the Warhammer 40k setting. They introduced that rift around the time of the Primaris Marines coming out and Guilliman waking up. So it would have been around the time of the Indomitus Crusade. And it was kind of the first time that they had advanced the narrative of the galaxy, kind of all at once. Bringing back a Primarch, rending the galaxy in two. And it kind of showed that Games Workshop weren't afraid to kind of destroy, in a kind of fun way, the setting that they created. Which I think is kind of important when you're creating your own narrative, which is you want it to change and evolve, and it's not like you create the perfect setting and then you just keep it pristine from then on. Part of the fun of it is that the setting will change over time based on the decisions you make and the games that you play. So I would say don't be afraid to do the kind of stuff that Games Workshop did with the Cicatrix Maledictum, where you just totally shake things up. But when they did that and introduced Primaris Marines and all that, it seemed like a good opportunity to shake up our campaign setting a little bit. I think we'd already been playing games in the setting for at least one whole edition of 40k, maybe two. So we decided, just kind of, I guess I had the idea and I proposed it to whoever I was playing a game against. What if 100 years have passed in the Icarus system? And since it was our own creation and nobody else is affected except for us, you could just decide to do that. Okay, 100 years have passed and we're back. The Dark Angels are returning 100 years later, and the whole system is more or less fallen into ruin and started being overgrown with plants. And again, that influenced how we would set up the battlefields in a fun way, and the storylines that we were coming up with. So that was fun. Custom missions. Yeah, another custom mission we did, I already talked a little bit about, was the game where the civilians were trying to evacuate the planet at the end of our 5-game series for the fate of Transcendence Moon. And this was a case where I think I was behind 3 games to 1, so I was coming into the final game of the series not just with a disadvantage, but an unwinnable deficit. And so when we were coming up with a custom mission, my opponent Mortimer was all right with me having some kind of advantage,
And the advantage that we came up with was to put the objectives on my side of the map. And the narrative that fit that was that the civilians were trying to board the escape craft, and my Imperium army, my Dark Angels, were starting out protecting the ships. So it was basically the Chaos would have to attack and take my positions, but they to sort of balance it, they would not have to hold objectives on their side of the map. They could just focus on taking mine. And this would have been 8th edition, so the game wasn't as focused on staying on objectives all game. I do have to decide what color I want this guy's gloves. I'm thinking either black or brown.
What do you think?
And I do want to maybe hit a couple Imperial symbols with gold. He's not an Imperial character, but he's wearing Imperial armor. And they usually have gold Aquilas. Brown gloves? Yeah, I think so. So let's put a little gold on real quick, and then I'll do those brown gloves. This needs a shake. So I guess that's one time I would definitely consider giving a player an advantage, is if you've agreed to play a certain number of games and someone's behind by so many games that they can't possibly win, they're probably going to be a little bit demoralized, and it wouldn't hurt to give them some kind of advantage in the last game, just to kind of keep them invested and give them a little more of a shot if they are struggling. Some other kind of custom rules that are a lot of fun for a game series that we've used are rules that kind of limit your ability to change your army. When you're playing a series of games, a lot of times the feeling you're going for is that the same forces are clashing over and over in an attempt to achieve some greater objective. And if you are playing the same factions, but you're totally changing your army list and your warlord from game to game, you don't necessarily feel so much like the same two armies are clashing, as if you keep the lists more similar from game to game. So we've tried a few different ways of limiting your ability to change your lists. Some of the best ones we've done, I would say one of the most simple is to simply say, you cannot change your list. We're going to play 3 games, and you make your list for the first game, and you have to keep it the same from game to game. And one of the things that's cool about that is it very much feels like you're playing the same group of characters from battle to battle, and you get a bit more invested in them. And it also lets you get a feel for your opponent's army and start to adjust to it and play a little better against it. So that is one way of doing it. And then there's some less extreme versions, like we've done. You have to keep your list the same, but you're allowed to change 1 unit per game or 2 units per game. So your opponent's going to know more or less what you're bringing, but you can make some small adjustments. That unit that really didn't work, you don't have to bring them next game. Or that unit that your opponent had that you had no answer to, you can adjust a little bit to confront that. There we go. Got some gold on there. Looking good. So next, let's do those brown gloves. Using XV88 brown here, I think. Is that what it's called? Yep. And then I'll be doing probably Agrax Earthshade wash over the brown. Same with the gray. So custom rules, custom missions. Oh yeah, limiting what units you can change. So another fun thing to do is escalation, where you start out playing 500 points and then 1,000, 1,500, then 2,000, maybe all building up to a massive 3,000 or Apocalypse game. And you can also have the same kind of restrictions there. So, for instance, when you play the 500 point list, all those units that were in it have to come back and be part of the 1,000 point list. Or maybe you're allowed to drop one or two, but the rest all have to be in there. And the doing an escalation like that is fun because it just naturally feels like things are building to a crescendo, and you get to finish with a finale of, you know, a climax game between two massive armies. And sometimes when you are playing just a huge Apocalypse game by itself, it doesn't feel as exciting. Sure, you've got two huge armies clashing, but you don't exactly necessarily, you should think about why, but it could just feel like, oh, here's a giant clash of armies. Whereas if you build up to it, it definitely sort of gets you hyped for that big battle. And it feels like the final battle is going to make it all worth it or not. You know, it feels like it's the one that really matters, I guess, if it's the last battle. Looks like he has a chin guard here. I'm going to paint that brown too, just because it could be like a leather strap. Usually I start out painting my flesh tone on these guys, which I do like a screamer pink. And he's not going to have a lot of that to paint. Maybe his mouth and his eyes. And his mouth is open, so I don't really want that purple on the inside necessarily. But might be one of the next colors I paint once that brown's dry. Needs a second coat on some of these parts on his belt. One thing that does come up when you have a campaign world is incorporating new players. I think we're going to go ahead and put the... well, actually, let's paint his base gray. That's something I have to do eventually. So, incorporating new players into a campaign, something that I've gotten a chance to do quite a few times. And it gives you the challenge of how are you going to introduce whatever new faction into the campaign setting. And there's some easy ways to do it, like just say, well, their fleet of ships has just arrived in the system and now they're here. They're invading. That's kind of the go-to. But we have used a variety of different ways of bringing in new players or incorporating their armies into the narrative setting. And some that I can remember are like Tyranid scout ship coming in and landing on a planet. I think Mortimer was just working on a Tyranid army, and so when we had just finished that last game for the fate of Transcendence Moon, he said, I asked him, well, what's Abaddon going to do now that he's taken over the planet? And he said, well, what if they look up in the sky and see Tyranid ships coming down? So Abaddon just hightails it out of there. I said, oh, that's interesting. And so that sort of led into our next few games. As Mortimer wanted to play as Tyranids, we said, okay, well, the scout ship comes crashing down. It's probably like the size of a skyscraper or something, and Tyranid bugs start swarming out of it and burrowing into the ground and all that. And the Dark Angels would probably try to launch an attack to set off explosives in it or something like that, try and destroy it. maybe they already tried bombing it from orbit, but it's too big, or it's got too thick of armor or something like that. So we ended up playing a game that was also very memorable, and again, a kind of a custom scenario that we came up with, which was a split battlefield where we were on 2 tables. I think both of them, I don't know if maybe one was full size and one was like a small coffee table, where half the battle would be happening inside the Tyranid ship. And the other half would be outside the ship at the entrance. So if the Tyranids won the battle outside the ship, they would like trap the Space Marines inside and, you know, wipe out the entry force. Whereas if the Space Marines won the battle outside, they would, you know, secure the exit, and the troops inside would be able to escape. And then the battle inside the Tyranid ship would be the Space Marines trying to plant the explosives and blow the ship up. I think the Tyranids ended up winning the battle inside the ship, just massacring everybody. I remember, I think, swarms of gargoyles and gene stealers on a small table. They were really strong. Which, you know, does happen. Sometimes you come up with some custom scenario and it's not quite as balanced as you think, and you know, that's not, you know, not a big deal. It happens. But I think the Space Marines won the battle outside the ship, so at least it was a Pyrrhic victory, a partial victory. And another memorable set we played was the... maybe this was against my roommate who was also playing Tyranids. The Battle for Survival.
Was that you, Mortimer? The one where I had just started Phobos Marines, and they were my first Primaris Marines, sort of like the Start Collecting Vanguard Marines set. Okay, so this would have been with my roommate, who was playing Tyranids, and we played like I think a best of 3 maybe, where or maybe we just played 3 games. Can't remember, but basically the narrative was the Dark Angels don't fully trust the new Primaris Marines, and they have sent them on a suicide mission to approach the Tyranid scout ship on foot. On the ground, and as the closer they get, the more the hive mind of the Tyranids becomes focused on them and tries to entrap them and wipe them out. And so the series of games would basically be the Primaris Marines trying to escape the jungle and make it to like a drop site where they could be picked up and escape into orbit. So that was pretty exciting. The Primaris Marines, the Dark Angels, did end up just winning the series in a close final game for their lives. So that was cool. Always fun when the good guys triumph, which is not too often in these campaign games we've been playing. Seems like usually the bad guys win, which has resulted in the setting becoming increasingly... ruined and sparsely populated, but that's all right. But I would say, you know, try to play your games where you are not too concerned over, you know, who wins on the narrative side. You want the story to continue, or to be able to continue, no matter who wins. I think that's important when you're talking about the stakes of your game. You want the setting to continue to be an interesting place for games. Well, I got a first coat on his gloves, but I think it's going to take another. Oops. Gonna need a little bit of touch up there.
what would you say has been your most memorable game? Which one stands out in your memory the most, Mortimer? Probably one of the ones I already mentioned.
Another thing I would say is you do want to have kind of an easy come, easy go mentality with new players. When someone's playing their first campaign game. So Mortimer says, I liked the last couple games in that series of 5 we did. Yes.
The Fate of Transcendence was really fun. Series of games. Really memorable to play 5 games for the fate of a planet too. Definitely recommend trying that. So with new players, you probably don't want to play like a 5-game set with someone for their very first game, just because it's kind of a lot of pressure to show up for 5 games of 40k. And it's better to kind of lure them in by having them enjoy themselves and have a great time and just want more of that kind of action. And once you've played several games with someone, then plan a best of 3 or a best of 5. And don't get too invested in having any one new player be in your campaign. Like if you have like a friend who plays Necrons, so you're like, oh, let's have the whole campaign be set in a Necron tomb. Well, then what if that friend, moves on and doesn't want to play again? So now you're playing a bunch of games with a Tyranid player. You're probably not going to want to have a Necron tomb be the setting of those games. I mean, you could, but it just wouldn't make as much sense. And so I would say don't have the narrative too focused on any one player. And I've also had, 2 friends play a game against each other set in the setting. And that's cool too. It does help to have one person who's kind of the game master or can have kind of final say over the campaign, in that then you're not having to take votes or have everybody following every game. But it's cool when the campaign setting is so much fun that other people enjoy it enough to want to play games there against each other. Hey, he's looking pretty good. Alright. I think 2 coats is probably enough on most of the brown there. I don't know if this is me putting the paint on a little too heavy or if that was already the guy before me. But I'm seeing maybe something that looks like a metal plate on the edge of his glove here and here. And maybe over there too. So maybe I will add a metal plate on the back of his hands. I just have to let the brown dry first. Mortimer says, when you were trying to wake up my new Fists army. Oh yeah, and Abaddon was just trying to wreck shop. That was a really fun series, and somehow I forgot about that one. It was one of the most recent series we played. Really interesting setting, too, of an underground base. So, Mortimer had started a Imperial Fists army. He was painting up a Primaris army of Imperial Fists, and it wasn't quite ready yet, but it became kind of the inspiration for a series of games. Mortimer's playing his Black Legion, and I was going to play my Dark Angels. Here we go with some Screamer Pink. Going to start the skin now, I think, with my smallest brush. So we were going to play Dark Angels versus Black Legion, and this game was going to be 100 years after the fall of Transcendence. And so this meant that basically Abaddon was coming back to the same system that he had ravaged 100 years later. And so I don't remember which of us had the idea to somehow make the Imperial Fists, who were not quite ready and not involved in the battle, be a part of the narrative. And what we came up with was that what if there was a secret underground base on one of the planets that had been in the system all along, where there was like a gene vault of Primaris Marines in cryostasis. Primaris Marines being in cryostasis for thousands of years was something that Games Workshop had incorporated into their lore when they created them. Primaris Marines were supposed to have been created by Call, going back as far as the end of the Horus Heresy, and they had been mostly Marine recruits who were left in stasis, cryostasis, for thousands of years while Call did experiments on them, improving the Primaris gene seed using ancient gene seed from the Primarchs. So we incorporated that into our campaign, taking inspiration from the Games Workshop lore, which is absolutely something that is fun to do and I recommend. And so we came up with our own gene vault, or cryostasis vault, for the Imperial Fists in our campaign setting. And the Imperial Fists are kind of known for their fortifications. So if it's an Imperial Fists Primaris gene vault, it just would have to be a fortress too. So that was how we kind of came up with the idea of an underground secret Imperial Fists base with slumbering Primaris Marines. So next we kind of worked out some stakes for the series of games. And what we came up with is, if Abaddon wins and the Black Legion, it means that basically the attack on the underground base is successful. What would Abaddon want to do with it? And Mortimer said, well, Abaddon would probably want to destroy it, just blow it up. So narratively, we decided if Black Legion wins the series of games, they destroy this underground base with explosives or whatever, and the whole thing collapses, burying anyone left inside. Gonna do a little more brown, second coat of brown on his gloves, I think. Whereas, if the Dark Angels win, you always want to kind of figure out what the stakes are in each direction. If the Dark Angels win, then the base is saved. And what would that mean? Well, more or less, we figured if the base is destroyed, then only some of the Imperial Fists survive, and they become kind of like refugees without a base. And if the base is saved, then going forward, this secret underground base would be the home of the Imperial Fists in the campaign setting. And, who knows? We might go back and have more battles there. And we had a lot of fun talking about this background for the game over the course of several games. And some of the kind of narrative stuff that just kind of evolved out of what we had come up with was that Abaddon abducted a bunch of people from this solar system, from Transcendence Moon, and then we said 100 years had passed. So that meant that basically the Chaos Cultists, who were part of Abaddon's army, coming back and attacking this Imperial Fist base, would be like the great-grandchildren of the Chaos Cultists, or the Imperial civilians who had been abducted by Abaddon 100 years before. And so if these were the great-grandchildren of those same citizens, then maybe some of them knew about this secret underground base. Maybe they had worked there or loaded supplies onto elevators there. So basically we figured that this base must be almost like legendary to these cultists. Something from, you know, handed down through the generations. Or maybe some of the Chaos Space Marines were, you know, are over 100 years old and were actually from this system. So we figured that must be how Abaddon knows about this secret base, is he heard about it from his cultists. And so that was fun, and in the end, Dark Angels did win the series. So I guess I have won at least one of these best of series against you, Mortimer. And that was really exciting to save the base and feel like the good guys won. I enjoy playing the good guys just as much as the bad guys, actually. Well, next I'm thinking let's do sort of a wash of watered down black on the armor. I'm going to use watered down Abaddon black instead of Nuln oil because I don't want this to just settle in the cracks. I want it to evenly cover the armor, but I'm watering it down so that the silver will still show through a little bit. Going for kind of like a silvery black. So yes, so you're saying that was your most memorable campaign series of games, and I totally understand. That was a fun one. And usually, I would say most of the time we play a random mission. I usually whoever's hosting the game will set up the terrain in advance. That's just something that we both agreed we're cool with. We're both pretty good at setting up tables that are pretty balanced. Usually we go for not exactly symmetrical, but kind of like almost symmetrical. With just enough difference to make it matter a little bit which side you pick. And so usually what I'll do is just we'll roll like a random dice for the mission, set up the mission objectives, and then do terrain that makes sense around those. I think that's one of the best ways to do it. It's nice to be able to set up the table in advance, just because the game already takes a lot of time, and if you have to set up the table and pick your secondary objectives and everything else, it's kind of a lot to do for a game that already takes several hours. Well, Mortimer, you have any ideas for what our next series of games could be, or our next best of? We've made plans to play tomorrow. I'm going to be playing Orcs, and Mortimer is going to be playing Imperial Fists. He has an awesome and very challenging Imperial Fist army to play against, which is based around a core of heavy intercessors with the Hellstorm bolt rifles. So basically every weapon in his army is strength 5 or above, which makes it very reliable. Plus, I love that Hellstorm bolter. 3 shots, long range, assault weapon. I think it's very good, even if it doesn't have a lot of AP or multi-damage like some of the other options. Well, here you can kind of see how the black is looking on the armor. I do think it's maybe a little too watered down for the effect I was going for, so I might have to add another layer of this. maybe we should come up with an idea for orcs versus Imperial Fists.
The orcs in the system started out, they were introduced
by having arrived in the system on a fleet which proceeded to crash on a planet. Just by chance, we figured they crashed on the closest planet to the sun, which was an uninhabited planet called Icarus 1. And it's one of its key features was a Space Hulk crash. So Space Hulk being a massive shipwreck in space, which will sometimes eventually crash down on a planet. And so I figured the orcs would want to use all that scrap to build their war machines. So the first couple games with the orcs were set on that planet, Icarus 1, kind of a Mars-type planet with Xenos ruins and Space Hulk crash and Warp Rift. But there wasn't really any Imperial population to attack for the orcs there. We do try to make all of our games Imperium versus a non-Imperium faction, just because it does, I think, work better with narrative games than doing like Ultramarines versus Blood Angels, and like you see at a lot of tournaments, stuff like that. So as far as the orcs, it made sense that once they had been on Icarus 1 for a while, building stuff out of the Space Hulk wreckage, that they would probably move on to another planet, launch an attack somewhere else in the solar system. And being orcs, I figured they don't need to be too crafty. They'd probably just move on and attack the next planet over. So that happened to be Icarus 2, which was where the Imperial Fists' secret base was located. So right away, it makes sense that if the orcs are attacking Icarus 2, it makes sense that the Imperial Fists would respond. And their secret base had survived, so that was their sort of base of operations. So I know we've played a couple games, orcs versus Imperial Fists, and the orcs, I believe, have yet to beat the fists. So if they've already been defeated a couple times, they're probably itching for another battle against these worthy opponents. The orcs really love to fight against good, strong opponents who give a good fight. So maybe it's the kind of thing where the fact that the Imperial Fists have been beating them has led the orcs to stick around and attack their planet that much harder. Orcs is never beaten, after all. No, I think that was with the new codex. If I remember, I think maybe my first game with orcs was using a leaked data sheets or something like that, or can't remember. But orcs have an uphill battle against those Imperial Fists. One of the things that makes it very hard for the orcs is that Imperial Fists ignore light cover, and during tactical doctrine, their Hellstorm Bolters have a -1 AP, and the orcs only have a 6-up armor save. So if you give that a -1 and you ignore cover, that's no save for the orcs at all. And with the orcs getting no save, the Hellstorm Bolters are very effective. Especially if you stack on a buff like reroll 1s or +1 to wound. It's not uncommon for a round of shooting to generate like 15 wounds on a 10-man orc unit, and they're all wiped in one round of shooting. So I'll definitely be thinking about ways to make my orcs more resilient. But then again, we are playing 1,000 points, and I made a 1,000-point orc list the other day, so maybe I'll just stick to that. Although the list I made had a mech gun in it,
Here, I'll zoom out and show you what I'm planning to use for that. I got these German 88s, and I glued some Orky armor plates on them, but I haven't painted that yet, and I don't think it's gonna be ready for tomorrow's game, so I'll probably make a new list while I'm working overnight tonight. Well, here you can see I'm pretty happy with how that armor is coming out. That silver armor with watered down black kind of washed over it. And you see how it makes this kind of dark iron color. There's probably a contrast paint that would just do this for me now. But I'm happy with that. On the weapons, I'm going to use a Nuln oil wash. But I like how he's looking so far. I don't mind dirtying up this gold on his armor because I don't want it to really stand out too much because he's not an Imperial character anymore, having joined the Genestealer cult. Maybe I'll darken up his shoulder gold too. So now is probably the time that me and Mortimer should be thinking about the inciting event and the stakes for our battle, and maybe even thinking about custom mission or special rules that we want to come up with. And so a good place to start is usually the lore. And so if we think about the planet we're going to be fighting over, Icarus 2, I'll just talk about kind of the situation there. Icarus 2 was a Imperial agri-world with, I think, no oceans, or at least mostly land. And pretty much the whole surface of the planet was taken up by farming. I'm gonna mix a pink now to try and make his face just a little bit lighter. It's kind of not really standing out much as is. So Icarus 2 was a agri-world until Abaddon's 13th Black Crusade showed up. And the first thing that happened, we decided, is probably the fleet, the Black Legion fleet bombed the planet from orbit. So stuff like the spaceport and the planetary defense battery would have probably been seriously damaged by a orbital bombardment. That's likely how the chaos attack would have begun. My brush is a little too wet, and I gotta be careful going in this very small area. So I'm just gonna try and dry the paint a little bit here. And then that was also the first planet, I think, where we figured Abaddon abducted a bunch of the civilians. I don't remember if that was the result of some games that we played, maybe. But in the end, we figured Abaddon, probably the Black Legion, abducted the majority of the population to the point where maybe just 5 or 10% of the civilians were left. And so if we imagined a planet that was fully dedicated to farming food for the Imperium and exporting it, and if 90% of the population was abducted, it would no longer be able to provide all that food. Like, there wouldn't be enough people to work the land and operate the machines and all that. And you would have, whole communities that were just gone. Can zoom in a little bit on his face, show you how that's looking there. A little bit of pink, a little bit sloppy. I have to come back with a little bit of wash to do some cleanup there, I think, or some black. So we figured most of the population had been abducted, and then since there weren't enough people to operate the farms anymore, probably the people who are left would just become focused on their own survival and sort of recuperating the planet, trying to get it back to what it used to be. But they probably would suffer some deterioration in quality of life and technology. And, after the spaceport was wrecked, probably they're not getting maybe as many deliveries and stuff like that. And just no longer have the personnel in place to keep all their systems operational. So we figured the planet would probably backslide to a more primitive state, but not as badly as Transcendence. So we figured now it's probably like a feudal world with like a medieval level of technology and government. So since then, we also figured out that there's a secret Imperial Fists base on the planet. So maybe the Imperial Fists have kind of taken over. If it's a planet that's sort of like no longer serving its purpose as an agri-world, maybe the Imperial Fists are going to turn it into a fortress world. What do you think of that idea, Mortimer? Imperial Fists are kind of known for their fortress worlds, and it is the home of like a whole cadre of Imperial Fists Primaris. Maybe they're taking over the whole planet. And they do love to build fortifications and stuff. Maybe the Imperial Fists have enlisted the human population to help them build a massive fortress. Where do you think they'd choose? The spaceport or the planetary defense battery? A mountain range? Hive ruins? Where do you think the Fists would? It says, give me an excuse to paint up those bastions. Well, there you go. That's what I was talking about, where the narrative can inspire your hobby decisions and your army that you collect. If the Imperial Fists are building up the planet into a fortress world, that would kind of recommend you to build more fortifications and bring them in more games. So maybe the Imperial Fists are building a massive fortification, and the orcs have figured out that that is where they want to attack to get revenge on the Imperial Fists for the last few embarrassing defeats. And the orcs are trying to strike the construction zone before it can be completed. Yeah, this is the same. Okay, so maybe they're building the fortress right on top of the secret underground base. Not going to be so secret then, but I guess Abaddon already knows where it is, so the secret's out already. So Mortimer says he wants the Imperial Fist to be building their new base right on top of the old one, right on top of their underground facility. I think that sounds cool. And that's also going to clue the orcs in on where their underground base is. So that gives me some ideas for the stakes of the game. So what if the Imperial Fists win and the underground base beneath the construction remains a secret from the orcs? But if the orcs win, they learn about the secret of an underground base. And maybe our next game could be underground on the first level of the underground base. That was one of the really fun things about our series of battles to save the base or blow it up between Dark Angels and Black Legion, was that we decided each game of the 5 games, the armies were descending one layer deeper into the underground base. So the first game was like I think the first game was, I can't remember if it was part of the 5-game set or if it was like a prequel game, but we fought one that was Mortimer's
Chaos Knights versus Dark Angels above the secret base. So it was like the two armies were kind of fighting to see who would get to enter the base first. And then it turned into like a race to the bottom of the base as both sides are trying to get down to the Gene Vaults. Abaddon so he can blow them up, and the Dark Angels so they can awaken the Primaris and save them. So that was very cool, descending deeper and deeper into the base. And fun to imagine, you know, cavernous vaults above the heads of the armies as they're fighting in some like kind of skyscraper-sized caves, basically, that are big enough for planes to be flying around and stuff like that. Which is like something that we came up with just because we didn't want to say like, oh, you're not allowed any flying units because we're underground. Usually we try to have the narrative affect the actual gameplay and army lists as little as possible in terms of like, oh, you're forbidden this or required to bring this, that kind of stuff. Just because it's fun to have all the options and be able to choose what you want to bring in each game. Well, as usual, I was way too heavy-handed with my wash, but I guess that's my style. One of my friends said something about my style of painting miniatures in a way that made me think it was like not exactly a positive thing. But yeah, that's kind of what I do. Slap that ink wash all over the models. Way too much, so it gets all shiny and looks horrible. Yep, I don't claim to be a pro painter. Mostly I try to get them all done so they can get on the table and I can enjoy the game. I'm a little bit more of a quantity over quality player, or painter, I mean. But usually I'm happy with my own paint jobs. Well, I guess that gave you guys kind of a little bit of a live example of sort of forging the narrative before a game and coming up with the stakes. So the inciting incident that we came up with is that the Imperial Fists are beginning to construct a massive fortress above their secret underground base. And the stakes for the game that we came up with are that if the orcs win, they'll discover the underground base and maybe enter it. And if the Imperial Fists win, the underground base will remain safe and secret. And that's about all there is to it. It doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. Maybe there's also some Imperial civilians at risk who are being protected by the Fists, as they probably don't build the fortress literally themselves with their own hands. They're probably just supervising civilians who have no choice but to obey their orders. Hey, we got a bunch of people in chat, or first time chat from Dr. Rhino. Hey, great to see you. Dr. Rhino was one of the first Twitch streamers who encouraged me when I was just starting out a few days ago. Great to see you, buddy. And looks like you brought a whole bunch of people to raid my channel. Welcome, everybody. Clive the Kiwi, hello. Thanks for telling everybody to follow. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's a raid. Welcome, everybody. So today in the chat, we've been talking about narrative gaming in 40k and how to develop a narrative, develop your campaign setting, how to use the lore as inspiration when you're coming up with an inciting event before a game, and how to make it more exciting by coming up with stakes, narrative stakes, for what's going to happen in the story depending on who wins. And I've been hanging out with Mortimer here, who's one of my usual 40k opponents. We're going to be playing a 1,000 point game tomorrow. My orcs versus his Imperial Fists. And I wasn't planning to stream it, but we could certainly try. That's certainly the plan for this channel, is to be streaming games of 40k in the future. No, Maryland models, I haven't figured that out yet, but it was on my to-do list. I was actually going to figure that out today, how to have announcements or alerts, but work went long. I've been doing some construction actually, and today I did like 6 hours of construction. Did some demolition, and for the first time I learned how to do some electrical installation and what else? Framing. Framed a wall in a basement. So that was kind of interesting. Mostly I've been doing gutter installation. So this was a real change of pace. Oh, thanks guys. I was getting off screen. Try to keep my model focused over this little X on my mat here, but here I'll give you a close-up of him. So I'm painting I think a rogue trader Adeptus Arbites judge, and I'm going to be using him as a neophyte hybrid squad leader for my Genestealer Cult's army. And I have named him. I am naming this character Winters, after Winters SEO, the famous YouTube Warhammer player, who was probably the first Warhammer Battle Report channel I started watching on YouTube. Winters and miniwargaming.com were the first ones I started watching, and they really are some of the ones who inspired me to begin doing all this. So that's why I'm naming this miniature in honor of Winters. Zoom out a bit here. And he's almost done. What's left? Just did a brown wash on his cloak, Agrax Earthshade over gray, to get this sort of dirty look. And I think I'm ready to put a black wash on his weapons next. And then I have just a few fun things to show and tell once the mini's done, which is probably just about done. Let's do a black wash, and then I think I'm about ready to call him good. So switching over to some Nuln oil here. Of course, I'm going to try not to spill the whole thing. When I paint, I'm out of shot. Turn a little bit. I could probably do that. All right. Thanks for the tips, guys. I'm still working on getting my stream set up just right. Added my face cam while I'm painting yesterday, so trying a new angle today because I did realize that most of the time when I'm painting, my face leans way down. So here we go, doing a black wash on the weapons. I can zoom in a little bit on this guy. And I do go a bit heavy with my washes. It's just kind of my style. Makes it quick. So, shall we say that if the orcs win in our game tomorrow, Mortimer, and they discover the secret Imperial Fist base underneath the construction site, then why don't we turn that into a 3-game series? So if the orcs find the base, they're going to go in. And if they go in, we'll play 2 more games inside the underground base. But if the Imperial Fists win, we can play whatever we want in the next game. So if the orcs win, the series will go on to a best of 3. But if the Imperial Fists win, the base is defended and safe, and we'll just come up with a new narrative for the next battle. How does that sound? All right, he's down. So that's pretty much all you need to do when you're coming up with a narrative for a game, is just spitball some ideas until both players agree. And hey, I'm pretty happy with this. Because the wash was so heavy, thanks Marilyn. Think we can get over 23 followers. That would be really exciting. Before this raid, I think my most at once was 2, one of which was myself. So you guys are awesome. Thanks for being here.
And I will be streaming every Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, pretty much 7 to 9 just about. And we'll be painting minis and talking about 40k. And who knows, maybe other games. I do have a huge backlog of minis to paint because I picked up the new Hero Quest, and I have a copy of the old Battle Masters board game I also want to paint. So we could use Crusade rules, but what I don't like so much about Crusade is just that there are extra rules. I do prefer to play just regular match play games, and I feel like those are kind of the most standard and traditional games of 40k to play, and that you can really have a really fun narrative game without having to resort to having units pick up injuries or get buffs from game to game. And I feel like sometimes Crusade can make the game maybe a little less fair. If one person starts winning a lot, their units might be getting more buffs than the other player, and that just turns into maybe a snowballing advantage. That's kind of how I feel about Crusade, but have you been playing Crusade? Do you like it? I know that Crusade has certainly motivated some people to get into narrative gaming who had never really done it before, and I do think that's cool. If you do like Crusade, I definitely would not tell you that that's bad. And it is something that is more like, I just felt like it wasn't necessary for me because I was already playing so sort of narratively focused before that. I have not heard of Blood Bowl. Of course I've heard of Blood Bowl, but I have never played it. And that is one game I've never played that I would definitely consider. What do you think, Mortimer? You ever been tempted by Blood Bowl? Oh, so Crusade has some balances built in, huh? Oh, that's right. Extra command points for the person who is at a disadvantage. Yes, I guess I have heard of that. Well, I'm glad they're considering it. Does Crusade seem like a lot of rules to learn? I know that Crusade can certainly pile new special rules onto different units, which seems like kind of like having to learn all your opponent's stratagems. It can be like extra stuff to remember. An ogre team. I saw somebody on Instagram today who had painted a Blood Bowl team of halflings. I think that takes some guts to play halflings in Blood Bowl. Seems like they'd have a disadvantage. Maybe they're really hard to tackle or something for being small. All right, well, guys, I'm pretty happy with that miniature. I do have just a little bit of show and tell for you that's related to playing in a narrative campaign, which let's get into. I guess the last thing I was going to say about the setting is just don't be too invested in what happens to it. Be willing to have your campaign setting just ripped apart and have that be part of the fun. Oh wow, Clive the Kiwi just won a game with halflings against black orcs today, 2-1. Wow, okay, so maybe the little guys aren't at a big disadvantage in Blood Bowl. Boy, what faction would I want to play in Blood Bowl? Oh man, so hard to pick. Oh man, I gotta think about that. Maybe I'm working overnight tonight. Let's see, I guess a 8-hour overnight shift. So I'm gonna spend some time looking at Blood Bowl. I gotta stay off of eBay, man. I have a problem. All right, so first of all, I just wanted to show you guys this book. If you have your own campaign and you get into building terrain, this How to Make Wargames Terrain book, this is the older version of it. There is an updated version. But I have this one. I got it secondhand, and it's just a fantastic book full of useful tips for building terrain. So you could really set your campaign anywhere you want, have multiple planets, and build terrain to match your campaign setting or the different environments that you have in your campaign. So we do that. If we're playing on a certain planet, we'll do more like a forest setup, and then on another, industrial planet, we'll always do city. And so that book is it's a great resource. This was fun. I made a generator for making your own campaign setting. See if I can read this for you guys. So this is an Imperium star system generator, and it lets you roll dice and create an Imperium star system at random. So just as an example, you start by rolling a d6 for how many inner planets there are. And if you think about the solar system that the Earth is in, we have the inner planets, and then the asteroid belt, and then gas giants, and then some small rocky planets beyond that, or planetoids like Pluto. So this first d6 would be generating how many inner planets or rocky Earth-type planets are in the inner part of the solar system. So for instance, you might get just 2 planets. And then for each one, you roll a d6 to find out what kind of atmosphere it has. So you may find that both of them have, toxic atmospheres. Yeah, Pluto did deserve better. There is probably a Planet 9 out there. We might find it soon. So then planets with no atmosphere contain desert and mountains. For all other atmosphere types, roll a d8 for number of biomes, and then roll a d8 for each one. So you get deserts, mountains, plains, tundra, forest, jungle, swamps, oceans. So you might have a planet that only has one biome, and you might roll ocean, so you have just a pure water planet. Or you might get a planet that's all forest, like Endor from Star Wars. Or you might get a planet with all 8 biomes like Earth that has both oceans and plains and forests, etc. So you do that for each of the inner planets, and then for inner planets, determine number of moons for each one. Roll a dice, 3-sided dice, and then subtract 1 from it, so you get either 1 or 2 moons, or none. And then for each moon, determine atmosphere type, just like for planets. That's either no atmosphere, toxic, poor atmosphere, breathable, polluted, or artificial. And for each moon with atmosphere, determine its type, roll a d8. So you either get an uninhabited moon, mining, colony, fortress, shrine, agrim moon, hive, or forge, like Forge World. For each planet or moon, I see. So that's for each world or moon. So each planet also has a type. So you could get an agri world or a hive world. For each planet or moon, generate a number of special features equal to its number of biomes. For uninhabited planets or moons, roll a d6, otherwise roll a d20. So here you get features for your planet or moon, like it has a space station or a Necron tomb or a warp rift. Also on the list, subterranean caves, Xenos ruins, a Space Hulk crash, a webway portal, ruins, a mining network, a shrine, a planetary defense battery, an orbital defense platform, a Promethium refinery, a Promethium storage network, a secret weapons lab, a governor's palace, a spaceport, a manufactorum, an STC librarium, or a munitions depot. And you could obviously make your own lists, but this basically just gives you inspiration for battles and places that you could set your battle to take place. Your opponent, you might say, hey, pick which planet you want to attack. And then once they pick a planet, say, hey, pick one of the features of the planet that you want to attack, or look at it and see what makes the most sense. Like maybe they're going to attack the spaceport, and then you set up your table to reflect that. Finally, next roll a d6 for number of gas giant planets. These are planets like Jupiter and Saturn that you can't actually stand on or fight a battle on. But for each one, roll a d6 for number of moons, so they could have lots of moons, which is just what we see in our solar system. And for each of those moons, determine atmosphere type, moon type, and special features like you did before. Then roll a d3 for number of outer planets, and roll a d3 when determining outer planet atmosphere type, which means it's only going to be none, toxic, or poor. And the same for planet type and biome. So they're going to have desert, mountains, or plains, and they're going to be uninhabited, a mining or a colony moon. Oh, I see. Determine number of... determine moon types, same way as inner planets. Anyway, finally, I have the last instruction on the generator. Inhabited planets have 1d6 hives. Hive worlds have 10 plus 1d6 hives. And for each planet, moon, and hive make up a name for it. So that's kind of a step-by-step way to generate your own random solar system, and you could customize this or make your own random generator pretty much in the same way. And let's see, last couple things. I have a map I made. This is an example of a campaign map. This is the one I started with when we first started the campaign in the Icarus system. And so you see I named it the Icarus system, and that gave me an easy way to name all the planets. So I just called them Icarus 1, Icarus 2, Icarus 3. And then I tried to get creative when I was naming 2 moons. I didn't randomly generate this. This was just what I made up. And we ended up fighting most of our battles on Transcendence, one of the moons of Icarus 5, just because it seemed the most exciting. And lastly, and I guess I'll say that to make this graphic, I copied a bunch of planet images I found with a Google search and just used Photoshop, or actually I used GIMP, which is like a free Photoshop alternative, to composite them together and to make a starry backdrop. But if you want to get a little more intense, you can use Blender, which is a free 3D program to make your own planets. There's some really good tutorials on YouTube of how to make a 3D planet using Blender, and I followed one of those to make this. And it's actually animated so the clouds will move around, and you could render a video of this planet and have it spinning and stuff like that. So those are my tips for making your own campaign setting and for creating some graphics to go with it and how to incorporate it into your games of 40k. Just going to set up the model now on a little spinner to show them off as we have finished painting. Maybe I got rid of my camera scene for this. Let me see. We'll go to the painting cam, I guess. I guess I'll show you guys again. This is how the model looked when we started. Got him secondhand with some paint on him and primed him black over that. And now we'll take a look at how he finished up in just a second. Just setting up a little camera view to show off the model. And putting him on my little spinner. All right, so let's take a look at how we finished up. I present Winters, the G-Sealer Cult's Neophyte Hybrid Squad Leader. Fun painting this model. Look forward to using him in upcoming game with my G-Sealer Cult. And I might come and do a little cleanup. I did go a little heavy with the wash on the jacket, and I think it might pay to come in and just do a little bit of gray to, hey, thanks. See if I can improve that look of that. But thanks for watching, everybody. Mortimer, thanks for hanging out. Looking forward to the game tomorrow. Can't wait to finally smash your fists with my orcs. And we'll see if it goes on to another 3-game set. Have a good night, everybody, and see you in the next stream.